Welcome to another Business Spotlight, where we share reflections, insights, and pearls of wisdom from local business owners. My name is Kerry James. I'm a business coach and a facilitator. And this afternoon, I'm delighted to welcome to this Business Spotlight MD, founder, business owner at Mind Being You, Mr. Mike Holland. Good afternoon to you, Mike, and great to have you on Business Spotlight.
Good afternoon, Kerry. Thank you. It's great to be here. Good to see you again.
So Mind Being You, and quite an intriguing title for a business, Mike. Please tell us a little bit of the history. How long have you been in the business, and what areas do you specialise in, please?
Okay, so if I start with how long first, how long, it's about 14 years now. 12 years officially when I sort of left corporate life and started this as a full-time profession. And the name really came about because the main focus of my profession when I first started was therapy, so hypnotherapy and neuro-linguistic programming. And because that's largely to do with the mind, I wanted the word mind in the name of my business in some way. And as I got more and more involved in learning more about the mind, the psychology of the mind, it became really clear that the mind, in whatever state it's in, whether it's a healthy mind, an unhealthy mind, an unstable mind, or whatever the state is, it's about how that person is being at any one particular time. So after a lot of sort of word bashing around with my partner, we came up with mind being you is how you are at any one moment. And that's the principle of how I work with most of my clients, is working with what they present me, whether it's a one-to-one therapy or coaching client, or whether it's a corporate client.
Okay, and what might be ideal clients for you, Mike? And what are the circumstances in which these various tools that you mentioned, NLP, hypnotherapy, etc., can benefit your clients?
If you think my business really is two-tiered. One tier is personal work with one-to-one clients, working with a range of clients. The youngest client I have at the moment is 6 years old. The oldest client I have is 86. And working on a range of issues from anxiety through to self-confidence, sexual trauma, self-image, and in between there's literally hundreds of different types of issues that people present with, which affects their mental health. The other side of my business is working with small to medium-sized businesses. And I very quickly became clear to me when I first started my business is that whether I'm working here in the practice or in a boardroom, the issues are generally the same. So a client presents with what we would class as a present state, where they are at the moment, and a desired state, where they want to be. And my job is to help fill that gap with whatever resources they need, or reconnecting them with the resources that I believe that most of my clients already have anyway.
Okay, and so broadening things out a little bit then, Mike, we're living in interesting changing times, and I guess going back to lockdown, COVID, but also all the other trends and dynamics going on, whether that's digital transformation, or people working more from home, or inflation rates, or interest rates, and all the other things, and I guess a changing level of understanding and awareness of mental health, I think, is probably another potentially more relevant trend, I guess, or more pertinent trend to you and your business. How have all those changes impacted on your industry in general and your business in particular, would you say, Mike?
That's a really interesting question, Kerry, because when lockdown first sort of came upon us, because we had no reference point how to deal with it, everyone sort of just locked themselves away. And from a hypnotherapy profession, there was a lot of turmoil amongst therapists in what do we do now? Because everything around therapy was traditionally face-to-face in the practice room. Well, the smart people in the profession quickly realised, like a lot of business people, is that we just stick it online and see if it works. And therapy lends itself really quite well to online work. So that was my first stage, was to move all of my business, all of the therapy business, online, to Zoom, Microsoft Teams. Not so much with the corporate business, because a lot of those people actually just closed their doors as well. So, but I was still able to reach out and support people that were suffering from a range of specific COVID-related and lockdown issues during that time. About 6 months into the first lockdown, one of the practitioners in the building that I'm in now approached me and said, he's a chiropractor, and he was going to see if he could get exemption from the lockdown restrictions, because at the time he was supporting physical health. And he suggested I'd do the same. So I applied for an exemption, and was able to actually reopen. And I worked all the way through COVID and all the lockdowns. To begin with, obviously, I had to wear full PPE, but I was able to offer face-to-face service here in the practice for clients. And gradually, as some of those some of the restrictions were eased, I was able then just to go to wearing a full face mask, but offer that one-to-one service for clients, which there were very few therapists doing that at the time. And that was a massive learning stage for me, because working through lockdown came with its own challenges, least of which was every day I was faced with the possibility of contracting the virus. Even though we had full local authority guidance in place as to what we should do, it was still really challenging. And for me personally, particularly because I had in-laws who we were the carers for, still are, who were in the vulnerable group, both had sort of COPD. So it was a real challenge for me to have to come to work every day and then go back into the home, knowing I might be bringing the virus with me. So it was an interesting but challenging time for me. And I think I learned a lot about myself as well as really having to up my game in terms of how I was able to help people with a whole new range of issues, specifically related to COVID and lockdown.
Okay, and tell us a bit more about that then, Mike. What might be the specific issues that arose as a result of those sets of circumstances that we all went through?
So there were the first sort of the main ones that really started to surface very quickly was this sort of sense of hopelessness and isolation. Mm-hmm. So whilst people were, they were locked in their house, in their flat, you could, when we first were into lockdown, you couldn't go out. It was only later on that we had that hours of exercise that we could take advantage of. But that initial thing, again, because none of us had any reference point. Mm-hmm. And there was a big difference from being in the house on a weekend where you could just chill out and flop out on the sofa, to actually not being able to go out and not even socialise with neighbours across a fence. So the first thing that really became one of the big presenting issues was isolation, how people could actually deal with it, because they didn't know how to deal with it. The other thing that quickly became apparent was very much like the virus, anxiety. I mean, there are 9 generally recognised forms of anxiety, ranging from what we call general anxiety disorder, GAD, through to phobias. And there were 9 recognised types of anxiety, which are all linked to this fear of something might happen in the future. But like the virus, we were then being presented as therapists with a lot of sort of hybrid types of anxiety, with maybe someone suffering from general anxiety disorder, but also developing a phobia then of meeting people. Social anxiety became a big thing. So it was a really challenging time in the sense that I've not seen a client like this before. How do I treat them? How do I help them? What do I need to do to be able to give them what they need? And I didn't even know what that thing was myself. So it was quite an interesting time for therapists who were still practicing.
And what about this move in awareness and understanding and confidence in talking about mental fitness and mental health. Like one of my old friends from Wilmslow Rugby Club, actually, they've set up a mental health charity called Loose Heads,
Oh yeah,
tackling the stigma of talking about mental health for rugby players and having
yeah.
ambassadors in each clubs, etc. So, how has all those dynamics impacted on the type of business that you do? Has there been a big change, you think, in the level of understanding and awareness, and how has that impacted your business?
Yeah, I think there's been a massive change, and there have been some positives coming out of COVID and the lockdowns, and one of those was to raise awareness of mental health. I mean, people used to talk about mental health as if it was an illness. That, oh my God, I might have a mental health illness. Well, actually, now the awareness is that there is a very, very fine line between a healthy mental health and an unhealthy mental state. So I think people are more keenly aware that that line isn't just for people who are mentally, have a real mental illness like psychosis, but the fact that we all have this balance, this mental balance, which anyone's got, can be set out of kilter by things that happen, things that aren't happening, that are expected to happen, or being presented with things that we have no understanding of. So that's one of the positive things for me, and probably that's what my business has taken off in the last couple of years, is that people are more willing and likely to think about coming to see someone like me, as opposed to thinking that will be, I can't possibly go and see someone and talk about my mental health. That wasn't the done thing. Certainly with some of the networking groups I was attached to, you probably know what I'm referring to there. But it was seen as a weakness, certainly amongst business people.
Yes.
When I became, sort of known for someone that could work with small businesses around mental health as well as physical health and emotional health and spiritual health, that's when people started to think, well, if we're going to bring our people back into the workplace, what are they going to need in addition to the normal health and safety things that we'd have to put in place? And some of that was all around, your mental state, your emotional state, your spiritual state. So I think that's been one of the positives. Sadly for me, it reached a bit of a peak when everyone was on the wellbeing bandwagon. Lots of businesses were having wellbeing for staff schemes. I was involved in helping a lot of local businesses establish those and implement them. But then it's just sort of tailed off a bit. And it's almost like reverting to, it's mental health awareness day next week, for example, and how many people know that, remember that. So there's good and bad in it, I think, Kerry. The good is that it has raised awareness. The big thing for me, which is one of the more negative things, along with the positive side, is that I'm seeing more and more children and adolescents who are still suffering the effects of lockdown, and particularly those kids who are being schooled during lockdown. So I think we're just starting to see more and more of those issues coming out in that age group.
Yeah, interesting. Is there a particular age group you think is most effective? My son is now 15, and I always thought he was the least worst age group because he had his first year in secondary school when all lockdown was happening, as opposed to final year and going to university and all those sorts of things. So do you think, is there a particular age range that you think were more impacted than others, Mike?
The age I'm seeing, and certainly the last year, it's between the ages of 15 and 18.
Right.
As I say, I've had a couple of under 10s, which is like, and when you get a sort of a 9-year-old saying, why are you here, Tommy? Well, I'm here because I've got anxiety. You just think, this isn't right. This isn't the sort of language a 9-year-old should be using.
Okay. Well, coming back to the business then, Mike, what would you say are the main kind of challenges you have today with the business, and what sort of aspirations do you have moving forward?
Yeah, it got me thinking when I was looking at some of the questions. I think for me personally, it's about, my challenge is where I want to go next. I'm very lucky. I've got a very busy practice. It's never been as busy, so I'm very grateful for that. I'm starting to get back to the thing I really love, which is training and teaching. But I think because of some of the things that have happened to me personally over the last year, losing family members, being ill and having to go into hospital for some major surgery, it does give you a different sort of lens to look at life through. So I think I'm at that point where I could just go on and just sort of, this is great, I love it, I'm helping people, it's what I wanted to set out to do. But is it what I really want to do? And I think I'm at that point now, just getting to understand that. So that's my biggest challenge, is finding where I'm really going to get. Spent some time, didn't we, talking about finding your why? Well, perhaps I'm looking for a new why.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Very good. All right then, Mike. Well, it's been great to hear your story, Mike. If two more questions, if I may.
Sure.
Since you've been a business owner and the founder of the business, what would you say your key lessons have been? If you have given yourself advice on day one, knowing what you now know, Mike, what might be your key 2 or 3 recommendations to a newly starting business owner?
I think when I first set up, like a lot of people then, I spent a big chunk of my redundancy money on a brand new laptop. I got a whole load of cards and stationery printed, and then sat and wondered why the phone wasn't ringing, why the emails weren't coming in. So, gradually after about 6 months, I began to realize that actually a new business is not that different from an established, massive global business. They have very similar issues in the sense of being in a certain place and wanting to go to another. But I think what I didn't spend enough time doing was understanding what foundations and what structure would really help me get my business to where I wanted it to be. And if I'm honest, back then, I probably didn't know where I wanted my business to be. Because I've been very fortunate in having spent 20 plus years in a corporate. We had all of those teams that dealt with the marketing. Even then we did have some sort of social media, but marketing, the whole thing about PR. We had people that did that. We had teams that did it. All of a sudden, I'm looking around thinking, I've got to do all that stuff. I don't know how to do it. So I think that was my big realization. I mean, perhaps I could have spent longer before I spent all that money on all that fantastic kit, by actually getting some of the fundamentals clear in my mind and in place. Absolutely.
That certainly is regular conversations I have with particularly newer business owners, that realization that they've set up a business because they are a specialist in a certain area, whatever that might be, whether it's marketing or AI or engineering, whatever it might be, recruitment, and taking it back down to the basics. The analogy we often use is you don't grow a hairdressing business by becoming better at cutting hair. And as you say, it's about moving from a specialist to being a generalist and knowing the 20% most important bit of sales and marketing and leadership and team building and finance and et cetera, that may not have been anywhere near your to-do list in a previous role. So
just finishing just on that point. I mean, you may remember I teach hypnotherapists and NLP practitioners, and what I've done, as a result of those painful learnings for me, was to actually, part of my training now is 2 modules as part of the training course to go along with their professional skills, to actually say, right, this is what you need to have as the minimum for a startup. The foundations, the whole thing around marketing, networking, the commercial aspects of it. Where's your business plan, that sort of thing. So it's an important part for my teaching now that I'm hopefully sharing some of the pain with people who want to go into this profession.
Okay, well, maybe there's a role for a business coach in there somewhere, Mike. Who knows?
Well, yeah, yeah, nice one.
But finally, then, Mike, it's been great to hear your story and some of your reflections. If anybody's interested in a follow-up conversation with you, Mike, what might you suggest as a sensible next step?
Is just to give me a call. Give me a call, drop me an email, you know, even if it's just to find out a little bit more about what I do, you know, how I work with individuals as well as businesses. And if they
Great.
just want to find out more about themselves, it's a great place to start.
Well, we'll put the URL on the social media feeds associated with this video as well, Mike. But once again, thanks ever so much for your time, for sharing your journey, and all the very best with Mind Being You.
Gary, it's been a pleasure and I've enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks, Mike. Bye for now.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.